Hey everybody, this is Jordan from Wednesday Night Warhammer. I just wanted to talk about one of my favorite detachments from the new Tyranid Codex that is a lot of fun to play and very strong competitively, the Vanguard Onslaught. So in this video, I'm going to break down this detachment just on the basic concepts, the stratagems, enhancements, what it does, and then we're going to go through some key synergies. I'm going to talk real in depth about a very specific stratagem that really makes this detachment hum and work strong, Surprise Assault. And then I'm going to talk about the Neuro Node because it's a very special enhancement right now because it's one of the only enhancements that allows you to redeploy after the roll off for Go First. And then I'm going to talk to you about one of the styles of lists that I've been trying and testing out with this detachment that I think fits the flavor very well and is also pretty strong to play. Okay, so first up we have our detachment overview. Just real quick. Basically what this detachment gives all your bugs is questing tendrils as a rule. All units can fall back in charge, and specifically Vanguard Invader units can advance in charge. Those units include Broodlord, Death Leaper, Gargoyle, Gene Stealers, Harpy Hive Crone, Lictor, Neurolictor, Parasite of Mortrex, the Tyrannocyte, Von Ryan's Leaper, Winged Hive Tyrant, and the Winged Prime. Alright, so we're going to talk about our first three stratagems. The first one is Surprise Assault. You pick one of your invader units, and then you pick an enemy unit. Your invader unit automatically gets +1 to hit, whether it's in the shooting or fight phase. Then, that enemy unit needs to take a Battle Shock test. If they fail their Battle Shock test, you also get +1 to wound against that enemy unit for this phase. Next stratagem, pretty simple. You pick a Vanguard Invader unit. It gains precision on its melee weapons till the end of the phase. So it's going to be fight phase. And then the last one that we're talking about on this slide is Seated Broods. It allows for reserves to come into play as if it was a turn earlier on your turn. Meaning you can come in turn 1 with your strategic reserves or deep strike, and with strategic reserves you can go into your opponent's deployment zone turn 2 instead of turn 3. Next set of stratagems we have starts with Hypersensory Cilia. This happens after an enemy unit has moved within 9 inches of any of your units. You may make a normal move of 6 inches. Then you can pick 2 units if they're both Vanguard Invader units. This costs 2 CP. It's kind of like Phantasm, a little bit more expensive, and always limited to infantry like Phantasm is now. Next one is Invisible Hunters. At the end of your opponent's fight phase, you can put 1 infantry unit into reserves, and then you can put 2 units instead if they are Vanguard Invaders. And the last stratagem is probably actually one of my favorite ones, is Unseen Lurkers. This gives Lone Operative to a Vanguard Invader unit. If that unit already has Lone Operative, they cannot be targeted outside of 6 inches instead of 12. So next up, we got some pretty cool enhancements along with this detachment. The first one is Hunting Grounds. After an enemy unit has entered the battlefield, they must take a Battle Shock test on a 2+. So this means anything from strategic reserves. This means anything from deep strike. This means like anything like the Veil of Darkness. Once they come in, they must take a Battle Shock test on a 2+. And it's 20 points. It's a very strong enhancement. I really like it because it fights Gene Stealer Cult, who are still spooky. It fights Space Marines and their Inceptors if they're trying to take control of your objective. They're trying to control, engage on all fronts, behind enemy lines, etc. I think this is a really strong enhancement. Next one is Chameleonic. Vanguard Invader unit only. The model gains stealth and the unit it is leading has cover. That's for 15 points. This could be good on a Winged Prime with some melee warriors, which we'll talk about much more later on. Could also be good for a Winged Hive Tyrant just to give that model stealth. Next enhancement is the Neuro Node. This one is very, very, very strong. You get to redeploy 3 Vanguard Invader units after first turn is determined. It's 30 points, so its points kind of reflects how strong it is. This enhancement is so strong because there are not a whole lot of enhancements right now that clearly dictate that, yes, you can redeploy after the roll-off. So this is very exciting, especially with this army, with how fast it is and how deadly it can be when it gets an Alpha Strike charge. The last enhancement is Stalker. Vanguard Invader unit only. Start of the game, select one enemy unit. Add 1 to hit roll and wound roll against that unit. It's 10 points. It's a cheaper enhancement. And in my opinion, they made it cheaper because I think it is the worst out of the 4. I don't really like this enhancement because it is basically telling your opponent which units are wanting to go where. And in this detachment, I really feel that it's important to keep your opponent guessing every step of the way. All right, so now we're going to talk about some key units that I feel like really help the Vanguard Invader Onslaught detachment achieve its game plan. First one we're talking about is the Neurolictor. This unit is far and away one of the best units that has come out in the new Tyranid Codex. He triggers battle shocks. He can give guys -1 to hit your dudes. He gives your dudes +1 to wound against their dudes. He's just really good. He's also lone op. He's tankier than he looks. He's got a 4-up invuln, 7 wounds, T5. He's stealth. I love this guy. He's so cute. He's such a good little model, and he does so much work for his 65-point price point. The next unit we're talking about is our Tyranid Warriors and a Winged Prime Brick. Okay, so this is 6 melee Tyranid Warriors, and this is a Tyranid Prime. So the Tyranid Prime is going to give them sustain hits 1. He's going to be able to fly around a little bit, give them just a little bit of extra move with that coherency. And then the Tyranid Warriors, you're going to want to pick reroll 1s every single time you get into combat. And that means that you're going to have 36 attacks, hitting on 2s with a surprise assault. We'll talk about that in a second. Reroll all 1s, sustain hits. So that means you're probably converting all of your hits, if not getting more. And then when it comes to wound, you're strength 5. So that's okay. That's middle of the road infantry strength. And then your AP2, damage 1. So all of those hits that you just rolled, you're twin linked, so you get to reroll all of those wounds. It's AP2, which is nothing to like shake your head at. AP2 is pretty strong right now, and it just becomes to be just this one big mincing machine that you can just shove up the middle. The Warrior and Prime Brick. I love them. They're great in Vanguard, especially. Next we have the Winged Hive Tyrant. So the Winged Hive Tyrant, I really think, is a great counterpunch. You can go out and just really hit somebody hard if they're trying to move up a different flank or something. But one of the main reasons why we're going to want to include the Winged Hive Tyrant is it gets to spam surprise assault. Now later on in this video, I'm going to dedicate an entire slide just to that stratagem because there's a couple of specific things with the way it's worded which really makes you want to use it as often as possible. And the Winged Hive Tyrant is going to help you do that because it is a battle tactic. Last but not least, well, maybe some people think it's least, is the Gene Stealers. I know this is going to be contentious. I still like my Gene Stealer Broodlord little pod, okay? Not because they can kill everything like they used to be able to, but because they just jam your opponent in their deployment zone, okay? So 10 32 base or 32 millimeter bases just being in your opponent's deployment zone turn 1 because of their incredible threat range is not nothing. It's pretty good. And with the Broodlord, you're going to get some devastating wounds, but I think what's most important about the Gene Stealer and Broodlord blob is you get that turn 1 charge. You force your opponent to stay in their deployment zone. You force your opponent to not be where they want to be, and it allows your Warrior and Prime Brick to move up. It allows your Winged Hive Tyrant to get into position. It allows your Neurolictor to reposition and maybe get a really nasty second turn and second punch. Okay, our key synergies. This is where I'm really excited about talking about this list, this detachment, and what I think makes it so strong. All right, so Surprise Assault, I've talked about it a little bit. You get an automatic +1 to hit. You could Battle Shock somebody. And then with that Battle Shock, you can also get +1 to wound, which is incredible with this detachment, with this army's relatively low strength. So that means your Gene Stealers wounding things on 5s instead of 6s. Any toughness in the entire game, they will be able to at least wound on 5s if you get the +1 to wound. Same thing with Tyranid warriors. The +1 to wound from surprise assault or the Neurolictor, which we'll talk about in a second, is incredibly efficient to stack with a twin linked ability. Next is the Death Leaper. I'm so happy that what looks like to be the face model of this detachment, kind of, the Death Leaper, is also really good, and it synergizes great. It infiltrates, it gives a -1 leadership bubble, can trigger Battle Shock, and it's really early, easy pressure that you can put out if you want to deploy him like that, so that he can go in, tag along with your Gene Stealers, trigger that -1 to leadership, and when you trigger Surprise Assault, it's a -1 to their Battle Shock test, making that +1 to wound hopefully trigger a little bit easier, and then get you some really good rolls. Next is the Neuronode. We're going to talk about this more in depth later on as well. And the Neuronode this is the enhancement that redeploys. It's all about being able to fake out your opponent, being able to be where you want to be, and being able to switch up your game plan right at the drop of a hat with that first turn roll where your opponent really is not going to be able to do. Last but certainly not least is the Neurolictor. Talked about him a little bit already. He triggers Battle Shock. He further punishes Battle Shock units. Unit being OC0 and not being able to be using stratagems is also going to take a -1 to hit. It's probably going to be +1 to be wounded against your entire army because of the Neurolictor. And also, like the last two bullets, he infiltrates. He can move up wherever he wants. He is also lone off as well, so he's great for scoring points as well. Okay, so we're going to take a second just to do a deep dive in the Surprise Assault stratagem itself. Timing on this is your shooting phase or the fight phase. That means you can do it in your shooting phase, you can do it in your fight phase, or your opponent's fight phase. Target: one Vanguard Invader unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot or fight this phase, and one enemy unit. So 2 things to take away from that target. The first thing is there's no range to this. So you can have your gargoyles in the back corner of your table, and you can target this on an enemy unit on the absolute other side of the mat. So it doesn't matter if they're outside of range. You could just target them with this. They have to take a Battle Shock test. If they fail, you can easily contest their objective. You can do whatever you need to after you take that Battle Shock. However, the effect: enemy unit must take a Battle Shock test, like we just said, until the end of the phase. Each time a model in your unit makes an attack that targets that unit, add 1 to the hit roll. Battle Shock test was failed, add 1 to the wound roll as well. So now some combos that we can stack on top of that to really help this in the detachment is, first off, the Winged Hive Tyrant. It's going to allow you to trigger Surprise Assault twice in your turn and once in your opponent's. So you can do it in the shooting phase, and you can do it in your fight phase, and then you can do it once more time in your opponent's turn, as well as spending a CP to do it again. So you could do it a total of 3 times on your turn, and you can do it a total of 2 times on your opponent's turn. So that means you can be triggering 1 unit to take a Battle Shock test 5 times. Okay, a lot of armies are going to succeed 1 or 2 Battle Shock tests, but when you're being able to span it 3 or 4 times, 5 times, the odds are they're going to fail a Battle Shock test. So you can manipulate that Battle Shock. You can control more objectives that way, or you can trigger your Neurolictor to help with the -1 to hit and then +1 to wound. Next one, this is one of my favorite ones with this detachment, is the Warrior Brick with Prime. It makes all your warriors hit on 2s, and you reroll all your 1s, so you're basically going to convert everything. And then with the sustained hits with the Tyranid Prime, you're going to convert more than everything. So all of a sudden your 36 hits can turn to 40, 45 hits depending on your roll. And then Twin Linked with +1 to wound is incredibly reliable. So you're already re-rolling all of your wounds. And if you have an additional 16% chance to wound, because +1 to wound, that re-roll is going to make it much better. Death Leaper, he's super cool. He's going to help trigger that failed Battle Shock. So with his -1 to leadership RO, if he's within 6 inches of whatever unit you want to be targeting with this, it's going to make that much more hard for them to succeed. And then last not least, the Neurolictor, it's going to further buff your surrounding squads. If you have 2 units going into the same unit, you can trigger Surprise Assault on them. If they fail it, then you could essentially have 2 units benefit from that one strat just by having the Neurolictor there and benefiting from the +1 to wound from the Surprise Assault in both ways, Neurolictor as well as the Surprise Assault benefit. Alright, so another big part of this detachment is being able to use the Neuronode enhancement to its greatest potential. So when you're using the Neuronode, I think you really need to take into consideration some things when you're deploying. So I'm just going to go over the basics of what I think about when I'm deploying and getting ready to redeploy with the Neuronode. First one is with this army, you are going to want to deploy aggressively if you are going for like an alpha strike kind of build with this detachment. You need to use the Gene Stealer's scout move as an additional redeploy. So you can kind of think of that ahead where you can deploy your Gene Stealers in a way where you can scoot behind terrain while you're on the front line without really needing to use one of those precious 3 redeploys. The next thing, like I was talking about, you need to count your redeploys. So when you're deploying, you need to make sure in your head you're thinking, okay, if I go first or if I go second, I'm probably going to move this model here, this unit here, shuffle this around, make these moves. Because you need to have a plan. You can't just randomly start redeploying things because it won't turn out as good as you would like. Another thing I would suggest is I would deploy the Neurolictors relatively safe midfield. You don't want them to be super close right out the gate in case you lose the first turn roll and then you have to redeploy them back, because those could be 2 to 3 redeploys that you really might want to use elsewhere. On the other hand, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, if they're safe midfield and you do get that second turn, then hopefully you can trigger that 12-inch battle shock on your command phase if your opponent has moved up and tried to take a center objective. And then the last bullet point that I try to remind myself when I'm deploying like this is it is okay to lean on unseen lurkers. You can count on one Vanguard Invader unit just being a little bit out in the open to pop that lone op on. You tell your opponent about it. This might make them come out and at least target that unit in order to make you spend the CP. And it also helps you so that you don't feel like you have to redeploy every single unit that is out in the open. All right, next is the Christmas Dreamland. You win turn 1. All right, so these are the steps that I like to take after I've done my victory lap around the table for winning turn 1. No, but the first one is I like to redeploy my Neurolictors within 12-inch of key units and screens. So that's going to be 1 or 2 redeploys depending on how many battle shock checks I want to trigger in my command phase with those Neurolictors. All right, so if they have screens up that you really want to be able to take care of really quickly, you want to have 1 or 2 Neurolictors there to trigger the battle shock on your command phase. Then you want to redeploy Gene Stealers that you're using. I know you're using them because Gene Stealers are the best, right? No. You redeploy the Gene Stealers to the best possible charge that you can. Whatever is you're beelining towards something that you're going to be able to gum up in your opponent's deployment zone, lock them down if possible, and then really advance on primary later on. Another thing that I always like to consider is in the redeployment step, if I feel like I can get away with only really redeploying 2 units, is if I reserve one of my unit of warriors, how can I gain from that beneficially? Because if I can rapid ingress next turn on my opponent's turn and then set up a really powerful turn 3 with a warrior unit from reserves, then that might be something I'm interested in. And then the last bullet point is I'm always going to be looking towards charging units to block forward progress by the opponent. This army isn't going to look to table your opponent just turn 1, turn 2. You want to kill them by denying them points. And one of the ways you need to do that is by charging their front lines and then spreading out in a way where your opponent really cannot do anything turn 1, 2, possibly 3 until they clear out all 10, 20 of your Gene Stealers and your Von Ryan's Leapers. So yeah, I believe that those are kind of the redeploys and the mindset that I go into once I win the roll-off with my Neuronode redeploy enhancement. However, if you are going second, you want to keep your Neurolictors midfield to threaten that second turn battle shock in your command phase. Hopefully you've deployed them in a way where they're behind terrain. They're not really easily attacked or gotten to. You want to scout your Gene Stealers to a position to threaten charge so that they're outside of line of sight, but also so that if your opponent does move up at all, then you can get a fairly easy and deadly charge on them. Again, still maybe thinking about reserving a unit of warriors. I tend to like to deploy all of my warriors on the field at once, and then maybe think about reserving them in this step if I have the extra redeploys. And then I would also do your best to only allow one visible target for unseen lurkers again. Hopefully you can make it so that none of your units are visible after these 3 redeploys, but if you do have one unit that is visible, then you're still doing all right with that lone op strat. All right, last but not least, I just wanted to talk you through real quick a list that I've been testing and having some fun with. All right, so for our characters, we have a Broodlord with a Neuronode. We talked about so much of the redeploy. It's a must-have in this list, in this detachment. Next, I have a Death Leaper, really triggers Battle Shock -1. Leadership and so on. Neurotyrant, I think the Neurotyrant is really, really, really good to further enable that battle shock trigger with, you get your buffs from the Neurolictors and so on. Really starve your opponent on primary through Shadows in the War for 1 turn. Also has the Hunting Grounds on a 2-up. When anybody enters any of your opponents, they must take a battle shock as well. So a lot of battle shock synergy in the first 3 characters, which I love. Next one is the Winged Hive Tyrant. You're going to want to have this guy just as a good counterpunch and just as a good stratagem spam with Surprise Assault. You can also do the one that gives you precision too, but most of the time you will be doing Surprise Assault so that you can trigger those battle shocks, trigger those +1 to hits and +1 to wounds. Then next you have 2 Wing Primes, and these guys are just to hang out with the 2 Warrior bricks so that you get the sustain hits. And so you get just a little extra punch in that awesome squad. Battle Line, 2 Gargoyle squads. I love Gargoyles. Gargoyles are, I think, arguably one of the strongest units in the game right now. They're OC2, they're 10, they take up such a huge footprint. You really can use them to, again, lock your opponent in their deployment zone, starve them off primary, and just, you can score whatever secondaries you want with these 2 Gargoyles. All right, in our other data sheets, first one we got the Biovore. Every single Tyranid list right now, whether you like it or not, you should love it, but, you have to start with Biovore. 75 points, they've raised the points a couple of times. It is getting to the point where it's like, but no, you just slam dunk these. The Spore Mines you can create, they score so many different secondaries, and they allow you to gain so many points that you just out of nowhere because of just spawning Spore Mines and being wherever you want to be. In addition, in a pinch, you can just slow people down, not let them advance with the Spore Mines abilities, and really, really, if you need to, I've shot Biovores and stuff. I think I've killed a Gladiator Lancer by picking off 4 wounds off of it with a Biovore. It's awesome. It's incredible. Next up, we have the Gene Stealers. Gene Stealers, again, I have 10 of them. They're really not to go out and kill whatever I want. They're really to go out and be really, really annoying those first 2 turns. You just send them out, you block something down, and allow the rest of your army to get up. It's a little bit of a point sink, but they do hurt a little bit. But they're also 32mm bases that take up a good amount of space, and they're 5 up and vuln with possible devastating wounds. They're okay. I think they're good, and I've had a good amount of success with them. Next 3, you just slam dunk 3 Neurolictors and Vanguard Onslaught. Really, all the battle shock shenanigans you can pull off with this detachment. You're really just going to gain so much offense and defensive output from the Neurolictors. Just passing out -1 to hit buffs, getting that +1 to wound that is so important, and really just having a great lone operative unit to have just wherever it needs to be. I love 3 Neurolictors in this army. Next up, 2 Ripper Swarms. These are kind of like filling the same role as a Biovore. They come in, they can investigate signals, they can do behind enemy lines. They're on a 40mm base, they're really hard to screen, and they just score points. So really, when you think about it, those 3 scoring units that I just talked about, the 2 Rippers and the Biovore, you're talking 115 points to score. I don't know. I should count how many points I score off of my Biovores and Rippers the next time I play, but they're really, really, really helpful for getting that secondary game in after you've locked down the primary. Next 2 are your melee warriors. Each of them are times 6. You just want big full squads. These are your hammers. They're going to go out and they're going to kill a lot of things, and they're going to do it pretty well. Last time I activated with melee warriors, they wiped a 5-man Death Knight, Deathwing Terminator squad. I forget what they're called. I don't know. Zach's gonna yell at me, but just from 5 to 0, easy, and it was pretty spooky. It was pretty awesome. I love those guys. They just roll so much dice. With the reroll ones, the sustained hits, the twin link, the possible +1 to wound. There's so much dice rolling with these warriors, and it's really good manipulation. Another one, 6-man of Von Ryan's Leapers. These guys have been okay. I've been testing them. They're really just in the same size as the Gene Stealers. They just lock your opponent down in their deployment zone. They're big bases. They can line up, and they just soak up primary from your opponent. They can kill screens really easily. Well, not really easily, but they do all right. And then your warriors should be able to come in and sweep up a good amount. And then, last but certainly not least, it's just 6-man Zoanthropes. They're just good. I don't know. Zoanthropes, they go into any profile you really could imagine. They have the blast gun, they have the last cannon, and they just do it well. So right now they're at 110 points for 3, which is it's more expensive than they were on the index, but I still think it's a fair price, and I still find it very, very hard to get rid of my Zoanthropes in this list. So yeah, this is the first time we've done some kind of content like this, so please let us know if you like it, if you want us to go more in depth with different detachments, with different factions like this. I'm a big fan of the bugs, but I know some of these other guys in Wednesday Night Warhammer would love to get on and talk about Dark Angels, Chaos Knights, Thousand Suns. So let us know what you think. We're really excited to be putting out more content like this, and we're really excited to be more in front of you, more talking to you as much as possible. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate the support. We really appreciate you subscribing, liking, commenting. We've got a lot of new plans coming out in the works. We just need a little bit more help with subscribing and liking. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.